Fool me once. So, a little while ago, Riot released a teaser for Arcane called A Score to Settle, and I have some feelings. What is Arcane, you didn't ask? Well, it's an animated series to be released on Netflix by Riot Games, based on their League of Legends, one of the most popular games in the world. I know a lot of you are already aware of all that, and the rest of you don't care, and that's where you're both wrong. A Score to Settle is 2 minutes of gorgeous, painstakingly crafted exposition. Arcane is based on two of the most beloved champions from the League universe, Vi and Jinx, wonderfully designed characters who deserve their own in-depth analyses. They naturally evoke primal feelings of awesome, and primal feeling is the blood of this cinematic. It exudes powerful emotions from palette to narrative. This video was released for hype, and I should be hyped. Were this 5 years ago, I would be telling you to be hyped, inviting friends who aren't familiar with it to be hyped with me, or at least pretend while my hype floweth over. But this isn't 5 years ago. I've been conflicted ever since I found out about Arcane, and to be honest, I've been avoiding it like the plague. My guttural reaction was cynicism. Ooh boy, how's Riot going to screw it up this time? I guess I'll have to watch it when it comes out, but I'm not really expecting this to go well. But is it fair to be so pessimistic? I don't want to be negative. I'm tired of negative. I don't want to be one of those channels, hate for its own sake, bad faith media criticism because thing bad sells. I want to be overall insightful, but I also want to be optimistic. I want to revel in interesting truths and how they can better our world. And the truth is, statistically, not everything can be bad, and you can't bash a thing before it even comes out, right? And yet, I can't deny for the past several years now, Leagues only provoke criticism from me, and I stand by those criticisms. Fuck this champion in particular. On the one hand, I've been avoiding Arcane for the sake of academic integrity, to make sure that when I do review it, I am coming from as impartial a position as possible. On the other hand, I've been avoiding it because deep down, I don't want to be disappointed. And simultaneously, I expect to be disappointed. Not as a critic, but as a fan. Fool me once, Riot! But when A Score to Settle dropped, I was sent a link, and without thinking, I clicked it. This video is, at its core, a critical analysis of A Score to Settle. However, the point of this video is not the analysis, but where it leads metatextually. It's about the origins of, and my quarrel with, cynicism, and how dissecting it predicts issues with Arcane and beyond. I am, in my heart of hearts, a fanboy. League and I have had a pretty rocky time with each other over the past few years, but I'm still a big fan of the game. I love the lore, and I've always loved Jinx. I mean, there's no asterisk conditions or fine print there at all. She's one of my favorite champions, and fleshed out, she could be one of my favorite characters of all time. Arcane is that opportunity to flesh her out, and A Score to Settle really sells the potential for her and League's story as a whole. There is fanboying in this video, you have been forewarned. But again, this isn't really about that. This isn't about theory crafting, Easter egg hunting, or the sharing of my raw, intense response. The point is metatext, and where it leads. So what's metatext? Well, let's talk about the Dev Diary. Back when Riot was a small indie company, they maintained a charming, casual atmosphere with the community. New champion spotlights and explanatory blurbs in the patch notes were pretty direct about their intentions, and over time, these evolved to carry surprisingly reliable humor.
Soraka. Fuck Soraka. Fuck your star call. Fuck your heal. Fuck your bigger heal.
This, along with other community fostering, really enabled fans to invest in elements not just in the game, like characters, lore, and the play itself, the text, but of the game. The creative staff, their artistic processes and direction, the mythos of players, teams, Riot, and the community itself. The metatext.
Ever.
No, 10
everything
was really good.
So out
No,
of
10
control. Like the Gunblade was just like, oh boy, here we
Dude,
go.
I love the Gunblade. Shut up, Jimmy. Shut your mouth.
The Dev Diaries were one method to meet that investment, providing behind-the-scenes breakdowns of esoteric topics or functioning as a kind of state of the game. But as Riot has grown, it's really lost that sincerity that enabled it to connect with its fans. The Dev Diaries feel less like efforts to satisfy the community's parasocial interests and more like poor attempts to hide ulterior propagandist motives. Usually the timing of Dev Diary releases is pretty haphazard to its subject matter, so when a Dev Diary for Arcane was released at the exact same time as A Score to Settle was, I kind of noticed. My instinctive response was, well, this was obviously planned. The well-oiled machine is running smoothly. I felt the perverse pleasure I had as an administrator when I looked down at a sheet of tasks and their perfectly aligned boxes and got to check off 2 at the same time. But I also immediately recalled how Riot orchestrated Seraphine's champion release, and in turn, the bad taste it left in my mouth. Everything about Seraphine's campaign was a calculated effort to create viral interest in her and, by extension, to maximize sales of her overpriced release skin. This dev diary for Arcane, likewise, just feels like a pre-calculated marketing checkbox. It hardly tells us anything about Arcane or its process. It functions more like an advertisement. And when co-creator Alex Yee tells us,
Arcane is our love letter to you, the players and fans who, over the years, have been with us to help make League of Legends what it is today.
the bad taste in my mouth intensifies. I am immediately, incredibly skeptical. And that's cynicism, that negative feeling that assumes the worst of people, that their intentions are ignoble, their methods dishonest, and their competence lacking. This is all an effort to sell us on hype, to cultivate those primal feelings of awesome and invested, and to coax content creators into generating free publicity, hype echo chambering with those theory analysis and reaction videos. And yes, I recognize there's some irony in me showing up to this party ridiculously late and unwelcome, but I've had some things going on, okay? The problem with cynicism is that it's a feeling, not a fact, and it's a prejudicial feeling at that. It in itself is not an objective fault of the media to dissect and diagnose, it's more like a fault in me. And I have been wrestling with this because I'm consistently reminding myself that I don't know the creator's intentions. I don't know if my predictions will play out how I expect them to. I don't know the future. And I definitely don't know if my feelings are indicative of anything beyond my own pessimism and resentment from years of frustration with Lee's direction that most people may not even share with me. I am aware and actively trying to give this a fair shake. So why do I feel so compelled to share this cynical feeling? Why can't I see past it, even when I see so much in A Score to Settle that I genuinely love? Why does it feel like the point? My problem with A Score to Settle, and what I know of Arcane so far, isn't a lack of charitability on my part. It's in spite of it. A Score to Settle makes a single objective mistake, and my cynicism allows me to see its root problem is metatextual. It's the same problem that's been ruining League for years and will probably ruin Arcane too, just like it's been ruining everything else. So, let's talk text, huh? Arcane's setting is deep in the lore of a game region known as Piltover and Zaun. Once separate city-states, Piltover sits at the top of a cliff's edge where the Pilt River ends. Zaun, a port city, rests beneath the Pilt's Falls. It's like a vertical Portland, Oregon and Vancouver, Washington, in that they've melded into a single city but retain their own identities. Identities which happen to reflect the two sides of romanticized capitalism. Piltover is the streets paved in gold ideal where everyone is upper middle class or ever more elite and the trains run on time. As you descend into Zaun, you are hit with the final form of laissez-faire capitalism. Tech barons at the literal top intermingle with affluent Pilties. In the city's smoggy middle section, petty bourgeoisie and scamming hustlers conspire to make it big by any means necessary. And at the very bottom is the Sump, where your blue-collar workers lose limbs and lives, taking on the most grueling and dangerous jobs with little compensation and less choice. This leads to the underclass's abundance of Sump Snipes, orphan kids who, without even the veneer of a social safety net, survive by begging, working jobs uniquely suited to their size, or by other means. The principal characters for Arcane's story, Vi and Jinx, originate from these roving gangs of Sump Snipes. Jinx and Vi have always been praised for the excellent designs that they are, easily inspiring those feelings of awesome, but they also subverted the stereotypical way League designed women at the time. As Vi and Jinx's stories in the background lore evolved, so did potential for these kind of deeper commentaries. Vi and Jinx were always foils of each other even before the Dev Diary's confirmation they're sisters. They represent divergent directions of punk energy and rebellion, inextricably linked by their mutual hostility as much as those more meaningful undertones. Vi is the story of the bad kid from the wrong side of the tracks who turned out right. Streetwise and morally sound, never robbing people who couldn't afford it, one day on a heist went wrong, some innocent people got trapped in a mine, and using some power-armored fists, she rescued them. The authorities, rather than locking her up, invite her to join them. Now Vi works for the feds, solving crimes with Sheriff Caitlin as a kind of brutish himbo Watson to Caitlin's skimpy Sherlock. Vi is effectively a pink XP, who, through a stroke of luck and narrative karma, was elevated to a decent, honest living at the elite upper crust of society, where she retains a certain air of counterculture by being the bad cop to Caitlin's good cop. Vi's technique summed up with,
Punch first. Ask questions while punching.
Jinx is the story where the kid does not turn out alright. A Harley Quinn XP, Jinx's design commits to the chaotic neutral energy that's so appealing with the bad kid narrative in the first place, but with that wild abandon that can only really be achieved by marinating in a generous dose of crazy.
Duck! Just kidding, that won't help.
Although it's hinted that there's some rational depth to her,
Hey, Fishbones, should we blow something up?
You might inconvenience people and hurt their feelings.
You're the worst weapon ever!
Jinx is mostly characterized by use of various named weapons to unleash wanton destruction for the lulz. She's the menace to society that Vi and Caitlyn are constantly on the case to bring to justice, and that was the gist of their dynamic. Jinx blows up some Piltover property, and probably plenty of Zollnite, but who cares about the pores, and Vi tries to chase her down, an unamused Caitlyn in tow. Jinx's default background is even a demolished version of Vi's. The story of their foil is simple. Order vs. Mayhem in Gotham Watercolors. Cops and robbers. Powered fists and bazookas. But it's always carried the potential for more critical narratives. The American dream versus the American tragedy. A Tale of Two Sisters. Downton Gatsby. So this is the story as we knew it. What are they doing with it? Well, let's talk art. Music is going to be a major theme here. Christian Linke, the showrunner for Arcane, is also the lead composer for Riot, and it really shows. For a lot of media, music is kind of treated like an afterthought, only really appreciated at that subconscious level, and that forces composers to be really committed to their craft. They have to be a blend of rote creativity, precise mechanics, and mad passion, operating for the pleasure of their own vision, whether it will be applied to dumb blockbuster fun, undeserving failures, or some of the most iconic scenes in recent memory. That combination of love and meticulousness just is a score to settle. You see it in Jinx as she absent-mindedly rubs the dust from her fingers after entering the dilapidated flat, and you hear it as the smoothness in her movements is tainted by that stilted ambience creeping in the background. While the visuals are beautiful and express their own truths, it's the music that functions as the primer to read the cinematic as a whole.
I mention this in detail not because I trend toward tangent, as you know I do,
but because it's important to recognize the extent of deliberate choices the team applied to every detail of this teaser. Linke, and ye too I'm sure, have taken pains to communicate so much in the little time that they have, it leaves no doubt that all that is said is meaningfully intentional. A Score to Settle starts with eerie, gentle threading of strings and intrusive, soft percussion. The unease trickling in disjointed breaths, elevating as Jinx finds the plate, connects her eyes to the boxing machine, and it scores. It only stops when the crow lands and she draws Zap on it. What's this release of musical tension? It's not that Jinx has been spooked, but that she has a distraction. They study each other, Bird and Jinx, and with a callous chuckle, she blasts the bird and carries on, spinning on her heels from the recoil in such a clean motion the scene can't even catch up. Notice the silence. The steps she takes towards the boxing machine, spliced with memories of Vi using it, are labored, begrudging, but her hands grip the plate surely. With purpose, she inspects the machine, replaces the plate, blows the dust off its parts to restore it, and then she starts it up. As the engine revs to life and electric guitar's distortion ripples 9 times, the music is back. The chaotic stylization of scratched letters spasm like static around her. Vi, Vi, Vi. Memories of an exchange of hands, a tender caress, and without a beat. I need to take a pause and talk about this narrative manipulation. The first third of the whole cinematic is used to evoke unsettling mood, culminating in a character-establishing moment where Jinx straight up murders a bird. We, the fans, know that Jinx is dangerous and unhinged, but there is a tendency for these young people's entertainment businesses to neuter the threat of these kinds of villains by showing the pretty explosions, but not their consequences.
Too bad it's Sunday. Those buildings would have been filled up tomorrow.
I've got a crick in my neck.
Especially when they make a tie-in story trying to pull a sympathetic villain on you. But the creators make it clear here that Arcane will not be pulling its punches. We all know only bad people abuse animals, but the chuckle is what really sells it. We are told directly what kind of person Jinx is, even by this point. But the second third of the cinematic contradicts that unsettling Jinx's bad news setup. As she entreats the machine, the tone is layered by sullen tenderness saturated in melancholy. The somber asks us to sympathize with Jinx, and when we see the memories it all invokes primed by a rock and electric guitar, the official instrument of Teenage Rebellion, we are again told directly why Jinx is the kind of person she is, and by reversal of the same beats. Brutality, gentility, gentility, brutality. The narrative makes the audience judge Jinx, then empathize, then feel the same shock and hurt as we are struck as she is. It's cruel, and it reveals everything we need to know about how we got here. Jinx is what Vi made her. In the final third, Jinx's boxing drills this theme. She is fighting as Vi, spliced in memory on the same side, emulating Vi's strikes, her ferocious spirit, an homage to how Vi made her the way she is. She is fighting against Vi, spliced in memory across Vi's stance, bitter, savage, rejecting Vi as collected and cool, a retaliation for making her the way she is. Jinx's climbing score switches in and out with Vi's previous scores as she ramps up points. The plate spins between the X'd out eyes of KO'd Vi and the bulging eyes of Vi the monster, escalating memories of affection and abuse crescendo into the final strike. The reverse electric guitar is the literal revving of the engine as it powers on and when it powers off. The musical track isolates her within this haunting, distortive experience. There is a moment in silence after shooting the crow that we see the first memories of Vi using the machine, but without the music, it's calm, objective, antiseptic, even a little reverent. It's the bare truth of the past without Jinx's parsing of it. Only in the musical noise, the anxiety, the violence, the mad chaos, is Jinx able to confront her buried emotions and their source trauma. Composers, man. But then, as Jinx pants in exhaustion, the score tallies. Second place. All of this buildup, all of this symbolism, and the apogee of this little story is that Jinx is not as good as Vi at a punching game. Son, I am disappointed. Let's return to the arcane premise. The story of Vi and Jinx, magical Industrial Revolution era street urchin sisters with a blood feud. Tragic little orphan stories can be compelling, but they need to respect the truth and the dilemma. More often than not, orphanhood gets treated like sympathy bait. A simple answer for a tragic backstory, whether you need more appeal for a bland character, counterbalance for obnoxiously direct aceps, or a convenient excuse for antisocial personality disorder. The drama inherent in the Little Orphans trope is derived from two struggles, the struggle to survive and the struggle against despair. Grave of Fireflies is a heartbreaking Studio Ghibli film about a brother and sister during the World War II firebombings over Japan. Despite Seida's pragmatism, ingenuity, and reasonable maturity, a mix of pride and underestimating a child's frailty results in Setsuko's slow death. Without Setsuko to live for, depression consumes him and he lets starvation take him. For all its importance and power, no amount of love can substitute stable childcare. Lilo and Stitch is about orphaned sisters in modern Hawaii trying to remain a family, despite Nani's resourcefulness, temperament, and reasonable maturity. Lilo's behavioral issues become so extreme Nani actually loses custody of her, at least before Deus Ex Zenonia saves the day. This isn't just a crisis of families staying together physically, it's about keeping them together emotionally, as Nani's adoption of the parental role leads to subtle resentments and unravels their sisterhood.
I shouldn't have yelled at you.
We're sisters. It's our job.
Yeah, well, from now on.
I like you better as a sister than a mom.
Even in the best of circumstances, no amount of love can substitute lost family dynamics. All this considered, I didn't expect Arcane to be able to handle the subject matter gracefully. When they canonized Vi and Jinx as siblings, I expected they just assumed them being sisters alone would make their hate for each other somehow tragic. Maybe they'd play up physical threats like hunger to establish it's a crapsack world, but I didn't expect exploration beyond that. But A Score to Settle does an incredible job meeting the little orphan's emotional turmoil. Jinx's memories oscillate between Vi cool older cis mom and Vi child abuser, and we see how damaged Jinx is because of it. At the same time, it's clear for the audience Vi sincerely sincerely loves Jinx. We can infer that she doesn't want to or enjoy hurting Jinx, thus she does it out of desperation to parent a difficult child, as a difficult child herself. It endears the audience to both characters, to their mutual plight and their separate sides in it. And it also winds up being the perfect focus for the conflict that is the premise of this story. A compelling, believable explanation for their murderous rivalry while honoring their larger themes of grown-up bad kids defined by violence on opposite ends of the moral spectrum. So why, in the last second, would they chuck all of that out and make it about sibling rivalry instead? And yes, that does seem to be the actual theme for Arcane. Now, there are people out there who enjoy the sibling rivalry trope. It's adequate as far as motivations for conflicts between kids, and it may even seem appropriate here at first glance, but they are, on the whole, pretty weak. They only go in two directions, the plots of lethal misunderstandings or misplaced self-worth. You either want a Greek tragedy where everyone loses despite how you're pretty confident they could have talked it out instead of immediately jumping to, fratricide, or you want something more like,
well, kids, this week we learned a valuable lesson about the importance of being yourself. Shut up!
One operates on that inferred assumption that things are more deep because dying characters are related, and that's somehow enough to hand-wave logic plot holes. The other is a petty vice that most kids grew out of at a Disneyth grade reading level. And while neither of these are particularly compelling narrative devices on their own, they also don't make sense in this setting. Why would Jinx get so upset over this? Punching is Vi's thing, and it's clear Vi's put a lot of work on the B64 training bot, while Jinx doesn't even appear on the machine scoreboard once. Why would she even measure herself in comparison to her sister through this metric? To be clear, I understand that the end to A Score to Settle is more metaphorical than Jinx sad her score doesn't beat Vi's. But how else do you interpret that reaction than Jinx is upset about her score not topping Vi's? And what symbolism is being shared other than Jinx is willing to kill Vi over this? And it was at this point that I started to really get into my head about the criticism-cynicism thing. Was I missing something? Am I seeing more than what was intended? Am I overly affected by the topic that I perceived was there and am just upset that it's not actually what the story's about? Was I just being negative because I had had enough bullshit from Riot that bashing it was fun and the feelings were blinding me to the truth? But the more I wrangled with cynicism, believing it was somehow a failing of objective criticism, the more I investigated the sibling rivalry thing and became aware of other little red flags along the way. Jinx's updated lore goes out of its way to describe Jinx in youth as a sweet young child, a relatively innocent little girl who never quite fit in. This is the most typical blueprint for the younger pressured by never being able to measure up to their older archetype. Sullen, shorter, smaller, always causing trouble. But this isn't just doubling down on the sibling rivalry thing, it's infantilizing, something Riot consistently does to its female characters. When Linky says,
"These two sisters have this very troubled relationship and couldn't be more different from each other. Each one a deadly fighter in their own right. And as all of us who have siblings know, you're gonna butt heads."
The backdrop frames this disturbing, obviously traumatic episode where she's reliving explicitly abusive experiences with Vi as just sisters butting heads.
Liar! Liar!
Damn it, children fight. It's over.
It's not just tonally dissonant, it's condescending. And there are other little red flags. Vi the puncher merely slapping Jinx, the slap being the most sympathetic of strikes. As long as the palm is open, it's not abuse, right? Jinx's heart eyes as Vi caresses her. Are these girls siblings or cousins?
Hello, doing your sister.
Why is the region's only character of color limited to a blink or you'll miss it cameo? And of course, but there are also bigger red flags. There is a lot of evidence suggesting that Jinx's descent into madness happens before the inevitable purpling of her eyes, the moral event horizon past which she becomes irrevocably a villain. I'm actually pretty down for exploring the motivations behind her early immoral actions while she still has the agency to own the consequences. But a unique voiced interaction from Fiddlesticks hints that's not the direction this will go. Fiddlesticks is a kind of demonic incarnation of fear, and when he comes across other characters in-game, he'll sometimes reference their deep-seated angst for horrifying effect. But Fids doesn't call Jinx out for active sins like he does for certain other champions.
Jinx! All your fault! All your fault!
Fault specifically connotes blame for accidents, unintentional misfortune. We can expect whatever this traumatic incident was, it's not actually going to be Jinx's fault, more like a disproportionate consequence for an innocent or trivial act. This makes Jinx a victim of circumstance, not someone who actively earns her morally gray character. If this is what pushes her past that moral event horizon, it becomes a post hoc justification of anything she's ever done, because it's not her fault she's clinically insane. While you can criticize this from a lot of angles, I'm most concerned with how this serves as a cheap method to keep her sympathetic. Swain also has a voiced interaction with a similar issue.
Faces fading in the flames. It was all her fault.
Fading in the flames reinforces that not really her fault problem with Fids, but, and this is where this gets a little tinfoil hatty, but bear with me. Swain is the de facto leader of Noxus, which has a tactical interest in Zaun. His thing is that he uses a demon of secrets to outwit his enemies, the demon's motif being a freaky looking crow. Swain's got a whole aesthetic that heavily implies he sees things through crows, and Now, the choice of a crow standoff could be a metaphor for Jinx being confronted with the deadly serious consequences she'll face if she continues on this immoral path, and her cruel, brash response is a foreshadowing for the recklessness that will lead her to her own ruin. But now I'm very convinced that no, this is going to be something more like the crow is actually a subtle hint of Swain's machinations, a pawn who's controlling the spy on her, or something. And so Jinx will again be post hoc justified for Jekyll obliterating it, #sympathetic character. Now that may be a stretch, but these voice lines do suggest they're going to neuter Jinx's dangerousness after all, and they're willing to break their story to do it. And we'll get to why they would do this in a moment, but let me reiterate the issue I'm focusing on here and with sibling rivalry as a whole isn't just that it's uninspired and I don't like it. It's that it doesn't work artistically, thematically, for these characters. Jinx's unbridled mayhem, that primal feeling we get when we see an explosion and go, awesome, but a serious exploration of a character that is willing to do a Hindenburg for the lulz,
You might inconvenience people.
needs an equally serious conversation about how someone becomes so immoral to find reckless abandon that's potentially lethal funny. Any origin story requires gravity deeper than, Vi has all these cheerleading trophies and I don't even have one.
Marsha, Marsha, Marsha!
And the thing is, it wouldn't be hard to wrap up A Score to Settle in a way that respects the theme of violence. Imagine if at the end of A Score to Settle, Jinx's score racks up and she does win first place. What if we see this as a montage of several games where Jinx overwrites score after score with her own? And at that final moment as Vi's last name is erased, Jinx still has that beleaguered, haunted frustration. But instead of the final beat where she shoots the plate, she strikes the machine to play it yet again. The inanity of it all, how she's deceived herself into thinking she's getting something out of her system by fighting it out with Vi and Proxy, but is really only tearing herself apart. Not just because she can't overcome her own neuroses, but because of Vi's lack of response, the weight of her persistent absence. While Jinx cares so much she'd play a dumb punching game in isolation ad nauseum, Vi has clearly moved on from this part of her life to bigger and better things, and away from Jinx, who is still trapped in the past, reliving Vi's part in it. What if instead of some haunting flames incident that Jinx blames herself for, what sets Jinx on her path past the moral event horizon is just this: to be abandoned from caregivers not once but twice, the second by choice, to both loathe and long for her abusive caregiver's presence, to want revenge and their love, to want to reconcile, sort things out, heal, find peace, but literally not be able to. A Score to Settle would shift from an ultimately meaningless pun to a subversive message about wanting to settle a score, but not knowing any healthy way how. Jinx is unable to express these feelings in any way but what she's learned through Vi, violence, and that can't give her closure. And even when Jinx realizes this, Jinx keeps fighting, destroying, self-destructing. What do they say about insanity? Jinx becomes mayhem not because she's crazy and no longer really perceives right from wrong, but because she was conditioned to feel violence as normal, as an outlet to express all her feelings. And without any other method to resolve her past with Vi, she turns to an endless cycle of destruction, aimed at the source of her unreconcilable trauma. I'm not upset that Riot doesn't seem to be going with this direction. I'm just stuck on why. Why have this ending? Linky and Yi were meticulous with every step up to this point. They've shown an attention to detail where they couldn't possibly mistake this as cogent. They wouldn't just throw in some loosely connected ideas based on wordplay that vaguely gestures at the idea of import and profundity and call it a day, would they? Would they?
A festival of flowers? For me? Oh, not for me. Not for me.
Yes. Yes, they would.
Arcane is our love letter to you, the players and fans who, over the years, have been with us to help make League of Legends what it is today.
Rather than try to overcome my cynicism, I realized to understand it, I needed to embrace it and see where it was coming from. But as I thought about Riot's missteps over the past few years, I kept getting caught in this cyclical pattern of, I don't know. I don't know their hearts, I don't know their plans, I don't know the future. I can't, in good faith, criticize what is unknown and yet to be. Cynicism isn't formed in a vacuum, though. My problem isn't just what I see in League and its metatext. The problem is the trends I've been seeing for decades, and you've been seeing too. You've seen incredible characters that push the boundaries of writing quality and critical discourse get bastardized into regressive tropes, anticlimactic arcs, and disappointing legacies just to broaden appeal or out of disrespect for the audience. You've seen studios take beloved stories or visionary tales and force them into excessive film series formats they weren't written for, squeezing every ounce of blood out of them with no respect for the material. You've seen all sorts of IPs trying to emulate the Marvel Cinematic Universe, setting up aggressive agendas, checkboxes without names, and yet with dates, tailored specifically to the shareholders' imagination. You've seen them punish passionate and brilliant creators with absurd trade-offs and schedules for everything from meeting outdated, bigoted preconceptions to incompetent calculations and selfishness and profit. You've seen stories that had provocative, organic, and frankly needed allegories only for leadership to reject them as harshly as possible, just to avoid any hint of a misconceived progressive veneer that might alienate certain entities, and then give us insulting pandering tokens as compensation. And I foresee it here, with Riot and Arcane. I've seen years of lore updates ostensibly trying to flesh out their characters merely ruin them by taking their scope or infecting them with regressive ideas. I've seen fascinating premises stripped to their barest parts, condensing material for efficiency or spreading them too thin to capitalize on sales. I see Riot even now trying to diversify its IP into several different concepts, and I see Arcane as just another means to that end, Vi and Jinx's story being the first checkbox in an aggressive agenda. I see two talented creators who've given us some of the best content in this universe tell me Arcane is a love letter to fans like me, only a breath after telling me it's coming to Netflix this fall globally, and Tencent Video in China. You know, one of those regions where characters like Varus, Rel, and Nico get scrubbed of any hint of gay representation, and characters like Graves and Twisted Fate or Leona and Diana will never get the developments they deserve because of censorship. Granted, I'm not expecting this to be a gay love story, regardless of the false advertising, but we know how Tencent specifically has strong-armed media around cultural norms, politics, and corporate predation, and we know they will not let Linky and Yi tell this story unless it serves them on any or all of those fronts. I see A Score to Settle, a gorgeous, masterfully crafted teaser hinting at provocative, organic metaphors that deserve to be told, and with a jarring deviation from them. Why does A Score to Settle end this way? I don't know. But cynicism tells me whatever the reason, whether it be targeted appeal to a broader demographic, a poor reinterpretation of a complex character subconsciously based in sexism, a last-minute jerk of the wheel to avoid a plot that's too dark or regionally inappropriate, or uncharacteristic incompetence due to executive meddling. It is indicative of metatext, Riot in its contemporary media culture. I cannot see the future, but I won't blame myself anymore for not seeing this turning out well either. It's no surprise that Jinx is the primary vehicle for Arcane. She captures the heart of what League of Legends is supposed to be: uncomplicated, explosive fun. She's basically their mascot, constantly appearing in Riot's ads and acting as the prospective new player's audience avatar. But League's always been more than the theoretical, lighthearted fun of the game. And when I saw a score to settle, for the last 10 seconds anyway, my guttural response was hype. Jinx, the incarnation of the game's modus operandi, was being immersed in all those other things great about League. The expansive, fantastic lore, the artistry and imagination, the beautiful spectacle, the potential for complex and deep themes, and the music. I was consumed by that feeling of raw, primal, awesome, and I got hyped. I do plan to watch Arcane, and yes, to make content around it. And I'm not really worried about whether or not I'll be able to maintain that critical, uplifting objectivity, because Riot has not been all bad for the past few years. Rel is, in my opinion, the apotheosis of their character design, one of their best ever, and a litmus test for a new champion's critical worth. That they unstuffed Senna from the fridge was as needed as the excellent representation she provides, and I do applaud them for achieving it. And the music, people! I may only like 2/4 of KDA, and I reject Seraphine right out, but more very near makes me a believer. Hell, Kai'Sa and Seraphine are my second and third favorite parts. Because, I mean, who can top Soya and Zakali? A Score to Settle has convinced me Arcane will be mostly good, and I don't begrudge anyone who just doesn't see what I see, who just doesn't relate to the cynicism flooding me with dread, the disappointment at the end of an otherwise perfect trailer. It is, and I predict Arcane as a whole will be, adequate. Cynicism isn't just an informed intuition to detect red flags and their meanings. It's a self-defense mechanism. League, for me, used to be unambiguously great. With the little content it gave outside of the actual gameplay itself, it was alluring, smart, not perfect, but hinting at directions and story that, if given enough resources and attention, could be phenomenal. And for a second, A Score to Settle captivates the way it used to. It suggests dark, provoking, organic content that would fulfill the promising potential it always had for one of my favorite characters to boot. But instead, it reveals it was already predetermined to settle at adequate. Perhaps it is unfair to judge a story not yet even told as merely mediocre, and to judge mediocrity so harshly as well. But I used to love this world. I am still invested. Despite its glaring flaws, I used to think it was some of the most undervalued narrative content I had ever indulged in. I used to feel it. So spectacular, glorious, heartbreaking, awesome. And for a second, I felt it again. Fool me twice, Riot.